Have you ever wondered how far someone would go when they know you'll always say yes? That question echoed in my mind the night I came home from my family's annual cookout, a loud, crowded day full of cousins, laughter, and that lingering pressure to smile even when you're tired. I dropped my purse by the couch, kicked off my shoes, and opened my banking app to transfer money for next month's rent. What I saw on the screen made my chest tighten. $112. I blinked, refreshed the page, then stared again. Just 2 days earlier, I had over 11,000. For a moment, I thought it had to be a glitch. But as my heart began to pound, I knew something was wrong. Within minutes, I was on the phone with my bank. The representative's voice was calm, rehearsed, too calm for what she was about to say. The withdrawals had all come from a device that was previously authorized. Same IP address, same device ID. I asked her to repeat it. She did. That address, my mother's home. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not just from the money, but from the realization. This wasn't just a mistake. This was personal. I didn't grab a coat. I didn't think to change out of my scrubs. I just grabbed my keys and drove through the dim streets of Chicago, the words "same IP address" burning through my thoughts like a fever I couldn't shake. By the time I pulled up to my mother's apartment building in Little Village, my hands were trembling, not from cold, but from disbelief. I had just left here hours ago, smiling through grilled corn and distant relatives who never asked how I was, only when I'd visit next. Now I was back, standing in front of the same apartment door with a knot in my chest and questions that didn't feel real yet. The door creaked open before I knocked. My sister, Sabrina, stood there holding a glass of wine, wearing one of my old college hoodies. "Back so soon?" she asked casually, as if I had come for leftovers. Behind her, I could see Jared lounging on the recliner, one arm draped over the backrest, a beer resting on his knee. Their daughter Haley was asleep on the couch, cartoons still playing on mute. "I need to talk to you," I said, stepping in, without waiting for an invitation. My voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't steady either. "About what?" Sabrina asked, already turning her back. "My account," I said. $11,000, gone, tonight, from a device connected here. She turned, gave me a glance that was more annoyed than surprised. Jared stood up and stretched, cracking his neck like this was a mild inconvenience. "Oh, that," he said with a smirk. "We needed that money more than you did, Elena." The words hit me so hard I thought I might actually lose my balance. "You... what?" I whispered. "You live alone, no kids, no loans. You're a nurse at one of the best hospitals in the city," Sabrina added, as if reciting a prepared defense. "We're barely getting by here. It wasn't like we spent it on vacations or designer bags." I turned to my mother, who was sitting in her armchair near the window, knitting something pink and soft that she didn't look up from. "Mom," I said slowly, hoping, foolishly, that she would at least feign outrage. She didn't even glance at me. "You're always so sensitive, mija," she said gently. "You've always had more. What's wrong with helping a little? It's family." The air in the room shifted. Not one person looked guilty. Not one of them seemed to grasp what they'd done. My father was in the corner, leafing through an old issue of the Tribune. He didn't raise his head, didn't say my name. When I asked him if he knew, he mumbled without looking up. "Don't make this a big deal. You've always been the responsible one." The responsible one. I could feel something rising in me. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, but a cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. "How did you even get in?" I asked. "How did you get my banking information?" Sabrina scoffed. "You left your profile open on Mom's computer. I just clicked. If you didn't log out, that's not my fault." She said it like I was the one who'd made a mistake. like she had simply walked past a pile of free money and picked it up because I left it there unattended. Jared shrugged. It's not like we used it for something stupid. Rent, food, daycare, meds for Haley. I stared at them, heart racing, throat dry. You didn't ask. You didn't call. You didn't even send a text. You just took it. You always say yes anyway, Sabrina said flatly. So what's the difference? My hands curled into fists at my sides, not out of rage, but out of the sheer weight of how easily they had justified something so wrong, and worse, how casually they had rewritten the rules of morality to suit their needs. I say yes because I want to help, I said. Not because I owe you. My mother finally looked up, but her gaze was soft, like she was explaining something, simple to a child. Elena, you don't have a family of your own. You've been blessed in other ways. All we're asking is for you to share. To share? I echoed. You didn't ask. You stole. Jared chuckled. Drama. So much drama. You're blowing this out of proportion. I turned toward the door. No one stopped me. No one apologized. My mother mumbled something about Sunday dinner, as if we'd all just move past this by the weekend. I paused with my hand on the knob, turning back to face the room that had once meant comfort. If you think I'm going to let this go, you don't know me at all. Sabrina rolled her eyes. Please, you'll calm down. You always do. But this time I didn't. Because for the first time in years I didn't feel guilt. I felt resolve. I drove home that night in silence. Not even the low hum of NPR or the usual traffic on I-55 could distract me from the chaos spiraling in my head. The city lights blurred past the windshield, but my focus was fixed on just one thing. How had it come to this? When did I become the person everyone turned to, no, relied on, to clean up their messes without ever asking if I was okay? I parked in front of my apartment, but didn't go inside. I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, replaying moments I hadn't thought about in years. The truth was, this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 10th. It was just the first time they'd done it without pretending to ask. The pattern had started early. I was 22, fresh out of nursing school, working night shifts, and sleeping in my car between classes. Sabrina was in her final year of college. She called crying because her car battery died, and she couldn't get to work. I wired her $300 that night. Just until payday, she promised. It wasn't payday. A week later, she called again. Jared had lost his job. They were short on rent. Could I help? Just this once. Just this once became once a month. By 26, I was paying part of their daughter Haley's preschool, tuition, even though I didn't have a child of my own. I skipped every vacation I was invited to by my coworkers, especially the one to Jamaica I had dreamed about, because someone in my family always needed something more urgently than I needed rest. At 28, I paid the vet bill for Mom's cat after it swallowed thread from her sewing kit. When I hesitated, she guilted me. You wouldn't let me watch my only companion suffer, would you? And so, I paid. I always paid. I remembered the day I got promoted to charge nurse, a role I fought hard for, studied late into the night, for practiced mock leadership interviews with a friend who worked HR. I was proud. I wanted to celebrate. I texted the family group chat. Big news, I got it. Only one reply came. Sabrina. Congrats. Could you help with Haley's dance? Camp this summer? It's kind of expensive. No. I'm proud of you. No. You did it. Just another request. I began to understand that in my family's eyes, I wasn't really a person. I was a provider. I was the emergency fund, the fallback plan, the one who didn't need help. And because I never complained, because I always smiled and said, of course, they never imagined I was stretching myself thin just to keep up. There was the time Jared's car was towed. They hadn't renewed the registration in over a year, and it was racking up late fees. He called me in a panic. Just, $450, I'll pay you back next paycheck. He didn't. I didn't even ask. I told myself, they have a kid. But when I saw his Facebook post a week later, a photo of them at a Cubs game, eating nachos and smiling, I felt something twist in my stomach. Then came the subtle, constant ways my mom reinforced the idea that I owed them. Your sister has a child to think of. You only have yourself. Or, you chose a good career, Elena. We're not all as lucky. It was always delivered softly, kindly, like a compliment. But underneath it was the message. So give. Keep giving. Don't stop. Last year, when Haley turned 10, Sabrina sent me a birthday wish list. A hoverboard, new iPad, designer sneakers. I told her I couldn't afford it. She replied, "But you always make it work." As if my boundaries didn't matter. As if my life didn't contain stress or limitations. Just because I didn't show the cracks didn't mean they weren't there. I remembered the night my electricity almost got shut off. I'd covered Mom's overdue water bill earlier that month and forgotten my own was due. I spent 2 days living, by candlelight, and never told anyone. Because what would they say? That I should have planned better? That I was being dramatic? Every time they needed something, it was presented as an emergency. Every time I gave, they forgot by the next week. And not once did anyone ask me, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" I looked around my apartment that night, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. Sparse furniture, plain walls. I hadn't bought new bed sheets in 3 years. My shoes were worn at the heel. My pantry was half-stocked. But the guilt I carried kept telling me I had enough. So I opened my laptop and pulled up every online transaction I'd made in the past 3 years. I started scrolling through PayPal, Zelle, Venmo. There it was, $2,100 to Sabrina for Haley's school trip, $3,600 for car down payment with Jared's name in the notes, over $7,000 in total last year alone. I exported the statements into a spreadsheet and began to categorize. I used green for anything related to Haley, yellow for anything labeled urgent, red for anything with no justification at all. One red item stood out, $950 sent to Sabrina in April labeled medical. I remembered asking what it was for. She said Haley had a dental emergency. But that same day, she posted a picture on Instagram with a caption, "Treat yourself day with my girl, mani-pedis and brunch." I had wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that it was bad timing, that she had used the money responsibly and just forgot to mention it. But now, under the harsh light of evidence, I saw it clearly. I wasn't helping anymore. I was enabling. I was funding comfort, excuses, and a lack of accountability, and they didn't see anything wrong with that. Because in their minds, I wasn't sacrificing anything. But I was. I sacrificed peace of mind, dreams I quietly buried, and self-respect I didn't even know I'd lost. And all the while, I told myself, this is what good daughters do. What big sisters are supposed to do. Now, as I stared at the growing spreadsheet and the tally that kept climbing past $20,000, I realized something else. I had never consented to this role. It had been assigned to me. And tonight, for the first time in a decade, I was ready to give it back. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I stayed hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by dim yellow light and growing stacks of printed bank statements. The spreadsheet kept expanding, line after line, color-coded transactions that told a story no one in my family was willing to say out loud. By the time the sun began to rise through the blinds, casting pale gold streaks across the floor, I had documented over $27,000 in personal transfers over the past 4 years. What haunted me most wasn't just the money. It was how invisible my effort had been. No one had ever acknowledged what it cost me to give so much, not just financially, but emotionally. My world had become a quiet balancing act of overdrafts, sacrifices, and self-erasure, all so others could stay afloat. And they acted like I should be grateful for the role. Something snapped in me that morning, not in a loud, angry way, but in the quiet, irreversible kind of way that happens when you finally see the full picture, and it's nothing like what you hoped. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the bathroom mirror. I looked at my own face. Tired, puffy eyes, drawn lips, a deep furrow between my brows I couldn't remember ever not having. I asked aloud, "Who are you still trying to prove? This to?" I knew what I needed to do. I had all the evidence. But still, some part of me hesitated. Reporting your own family isn't easy. It feels unnatural, like you're betraying the people who raised you, even when they're the ones who betrayed you first. But then I remembered the way Jared laughed, the way Sabrina said, "You always say yes anyway." The way Mom didn't. Even blink. They didn't just take from me, they expected it. And they'd do it again. I pulled out a manila folder from my bookshelf, the one labeled Important Documents. I'd always kept things organized, just in case. I added the printed statements, the color-coded spreadsheet, a copy of the wire transfers, and a printed list of login times showing the IP matches. Then I slid in screenshots of texts and emails that confirmed requests, dates, and explanations that now read like carefully rehearsed lies. By 10 a.m., I was at the Cook County Police Department. The lobby was sterile, humming with quiet tension. A woman at the desk gave me a clipboard and a form for financial fraud reporting. My hands didn't tremble. I filled in every line with precision: names, dates, amounts, family relationships. Then I sat down in the waiting area with the folder, pressed to my chest like a shield. After 20 minutes, a detective stepped into the hall and called my name. "Ms. Cruz?" I followed him into a small, windowless room. He introduced himself as Detective Alan Reyes, a mid-40s man with kind eyes and a voice that carried both authority and weariness. He listened closely as I explained everything, flipping through my paperwork, nodding occasionally, jotting notes. Not once did he interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled and said, "You did a lot of work here, and you did the right thing by coming in." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My throat was tight. "We'll start with a preliminary investigation. This kind of unauthorized access, especially by known individuals with intent, can qualify as financial exploitation and computer fraud under state law. If we can verify the device access logs and transaction patterns, we'll escalate it." "Even if it's my family?" I asked quietly. He looked up. "Especially if it's your family. They don't get a free pass to violate your trust." Those words stayed with me all day. When I left the station, the sky had darkened. Summer storms were rolling in. I sat in my car and watched the first drops hit the windshield. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't consumed with guilt or questioning my choices. I was steady. Back home, I lit a candle and played music. Something slow, instrumental, calm. I opened my notes app and began writing. Not for them, but for me. Every memory I had buried under the weight of obligation came pouring out. Times I had lied to friends to cover for a missed dinner because of a last-minute family emergency. Times I had skipped buying myself a winter coat to cover Haley's Christmas wish list. I wrote it all down. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I simply sat still. And in that stillness, I realized that this act of defending myself, of setting a boundary and calling it what it was, this was love too. Not the love they demanded from me, but the kind I had long withheld from myself. The next morning, I woke early, printed a few more documents, and organized them neatly in the folder. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't just reacting to their chaos. I was reclaiming my life. I had no idea what would come next. But I knew one thing. I would never again apologize for protecting my peace. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the break room at the hospital during my lunch shift, quietly stirring almond milk into my coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a split second, I hesitated. I had received so many calls from unfamiliar numbers lately that I'd stopped answering. But something made me step into the hallway and press accept. "Elena Cruz?" a voice asked. I recognized it immediately. Detective Reyes. "Yes, this is she?" "We've completed our preliminary investigation," he said. "Based on the information you submitted, your banking activity, and the IP tracebacks, we have sufficient grounds to proceed. The Financial Crimes Unit will be making contact with the involved individuals today." My hand froze midair. "Today?" I repeated. "Yes," he said. "We'll be moving forward." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Not because I regretted anything, but because this was the moment, the real shift. Not the silent decision at my kitchen table, not the forms filled out in the police station, but this. The part where justice stopped being an idea and became action. That evening, the storm that had been quietly brewing in my family for years finally cracked wide open. As I was walking home from the L train, my phone began to light up like a siren. First, a text from my mother. "Call me immediately. This is serious, Elena." Then another from Sabrina. "What are you doing? Why are there people at the house asking questions about you?" And finally, Jared. "Don't do this. You're destroying everything. Are you happy now?" I didn't answer any of them. I didn't even open the messages after reading the previews. Instead, I put my phone on silent and slipped it into the drawer of my nightstand, next to a half-finished novel I hadn't had time to read in months. The next morning at work, my unit manager, Denise, pulled me aside. "Hey," she said gently, "we got a call from a local journalist asking to confirm employment records related to a financial investigation. We didn't disclose anything, of course, but I thought you should know." I felt the heat rise in my face. I started to apologize, but she held up a hand. "Don't." "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Just let us know if you need time off." That moment undid something tight in my chest. Not because it erased the embarrassment, but because it was the first time someone didn't ask me to explain myself. She simply believed me, respected the boundary, gave me space. Back at home, I checked my email. Dozens of missed messages. One, from Jared, caught my attention, not because I wanted to read it, but because the subject line said, "Please, just one chance to talk." I opened it. "Elena, I've been suspended from work. They're investigating my accounts." I didn't think it would go this far. Sabrina is freaking out. Haley's school won't release her transcripts because her tuition is overdue. "You have to say something, please." What struck me wasn't the fear in his tone. It was the complete absence of reflection. There was no apology, no admission, no understanding of how deeply they had violated my trust. Only panic, only desperation now that the consequences were no longer mine to carry. The following day, my father texted me. A single line. "The bank sent us a foreclosure notice. We have 30 days. I stared at it for a long time, letting the meaning sink in. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because this was the first time he had ever reached out first. Not for a birthday, not for a job promotion, not to say thank you. Just now, because the family structure had finally cracked, and I was no longer the one sealing the fault lines. I didn't respond. That night, I stood by my window and watched the streetlights flicker across the parked cars. I thought of every time I'd stayed up past midnight wiring money, every shift I'd picked up to cover someone else's failure to plan, every meal I skipped, every vacation I canceled, every part of myself I'd quietly given away so they wouldn't drown. And none of it had made them grateful. It had only taught them to expect more. This silence, this refusal to respond, wasn't revenge. It was liberation. the messages kept coming. Sabrina, you're not even talking to your own niece anymore. What kind of person does that? Jared, so what now? You want us in jail? Over some money you didn't even miss? But the real message came from myself. And it was this. I wasn't going to answer, not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. About me. About my peace. About not being pulled back into a cycle that fed on guilt and relied on my silence. That weekend, I packed a suitcase and boarded a flight to Santa Fe, a place I had once visited during a conference years ago and never forgotten. The light there had felt different, warmer, softer, untouched. I booked a small guest house for a week, turned off my phone, and spent the days walking unfamiliar streets, letting the stillness wrap around me like armor. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how long the investigation would take or what the exact consequences would be for my family. But what I did know, what I finally accepted, was that power isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet choice not to pick up the phone, the decision to walk away, the strength to stop explaining and start protecting yourself. And for the first time, I wasn't surviving someone else's storm, I was stepping out of it. Santa Fe was quieter than I remembered. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like a blanket, letting you breathe without asking why you're gasping. I rented a small adobe casita on the edge of town, nestled between sun-worn hills and low desert trees. It had whitewashed walls, clay tile floors, and a tiny courtyard where hummingbirds flitted around in the morning. For the first time in what felt like years, no one knew where I was. No one was asking me for anything. That first night, I sat outside with a mug of peppermint tea, wrapped in a borrowed fleece blanket, and just listened. No phone calls, no guilt, no false emergencies. Only the wind rustling through the brush, and the distant sound of a train moving across the high desert. And in that stillness, I could finally hear myself again. I spent the first 3 days doing nothing but walking. Down Canyon Road with its galleries and old stone walls. Through the plaza, where tourists drifted in and out of boutiques. In the icy mornings, I visited the small coffee shop near the cathedral and sat by the window, journaling, people watching, and watching light shift over adobe rooftops. Back in Chicago, my inbox was no doubt overflowing. My phone, if it had been turned on, would have been buzzing endlessly. But here, everything felt suspended. I was still me, but I wasn't carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. And strangely, as the pressure lifted, something else returned. Energy, clarity, hunger. I ate full meals again without glancing at my bank balance. I slept through the night. I began to wake up early, not because I was anxious, but because I was rested. By the 5th day, I opened my laptop and began sketching out ideas for a continuing education program I had been thinking about for months. Back in the hospital, I'd pitched it casually once, an internal mentorship initiative for new nurses to avoid burnout. The idea was brushed off at the time. No budget, no demand. But now, with space to think clearly and no guilt weighing down my spine, the ideas came faster than I could type. I submitted the draft to my director from the porch of that casita, still in pajama pants and slippers, a glass of cucumber water sweating beside me. The next morning, an email popped up with the subject line, "Call me, this is excellent." Julian, our regional chief of staff, was on the line within hours. He loved the plan, said it showed leadership and innovation, asked if I had ever considered taking on a larger role, perhaps something that covered the entire West Coast region. I paused for a long moment. A few months ago, I would have said no immediately. I would have said, "Not right now," or "My family needs me." But now, sitting under the pale New Mexico sun, I realized I had nothing holding me back except the habits I had finally broken. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Julian's voice lit up. I had a feeling you'd say that. After the call, I sat by the window, notebook in hand, and wrote something simple. This is who you could have always been, if no one had ever taught you to shrink. Later that evening, I cooked dinner. Something I hadn't done just for myself in months. A proper meal with roasted vegetables and a glass of red wine. I put on soft jazz in the background and lit a candle, just because it made the room feel warm. And there, in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. But it wasn't just the scenery or the rest that soothed me. It was the boundary I had drawn and refused to erase. The line that said, "I'm not responsible for everyone's chaos." That line had cost me years of strained silence, manipulation, and false guilt. But now it gave me everything back: my time, my mind, my peace. A few days later, I opened my blog for the first time in years and began writing again. Not just about nursing, but about boundaries, about how family loyalty and self-sacrifice are not the same thing, about how you can love people deeply and still say no. The post received more comments than I expected. Quiet messages from strangers, nurses, daughters, sons, people who had also been the strong ones in their families, people who had kept giving until they had nothing left. One woman wrote, "I read your story, and it felt like someone had been watching my life. I didn't know it was okay to walk away until now." Another said, "You reminded me that peace is not selfish. It's sacred." I bookmarked those messages, not because I needed validation, but because they reminded me I wasn't alone. My story wasn't rare. It was simply rarely told. Back home, the fallout was still unfolding. A friend texted me to say she heard that my sister was trying to start a GoFundMe, claiming she had been cut off unfairly by a relative. Jared had deleted most of his social media accounts. My mother had stopped calling, though a voicemail came through a week later. I didn't listen. I just watched the timestamp, then archived it. Not out of cruelty, but because I was done reopening wounds that had only ever festered. I didn't need another apology that wasn't real. I didn't need explanations that came only when consequences knocked at the door. I had learned something important in the silence. When you stop bleeding for others, you begin to heal. When you let go of being the one who saves everyone else, you finally get the chance to save yourself. And I was choosing me now. Quietly. Fully. Without regret. The week after I posted my first blog entry, I received a message that made me pause. It came late at night, long after I'd closed my laptop, and arrived through the contact form on my site. The name on it was someone I barely remembered: Lana Rivera, a quiet cousin of Jared's who had attended a few family gatherings over the years. She had always lingered on the edges of the room, polite but invisible, the kind of person no one paid much attention to. Her message began with just 2 words: "Thank you." I sat up in bed and read every line of what she wrote, my heart tightening with each sentence. She explained how, for years, she'd been the one who took care of her aging mother, paid off her brother's credit cards, and co-signed for a cousin's car loan she never saw again. She'd been labeled the reliable one, the same way I had expected to say yes to everything without complaint. She wrote, "Your story gave me permission to stop explaining myself. I finally said no to my brother last week. He called me cruel. I didn't flinch." I stared at the message for a long time, something inside me shifting. I had written that blog entry to release my own thoughts, to understand myself more clearly. I hadn't expected it to become a mirror for someone else. But as the days passed, more messages trickled in, then poured. A man from Texas. I sent your blog to my sister. She's been the emotional bank of our family for years. She cried when she read it. A woman in Ontario. My parents always said, "Since you don't have kids, you should help your brothers." I've been helping since I was 19. Your story helped me understand why I'm exhausted all the time. A nurse in Michigan. I thought I was the only one who felt guilty for not answering family calls after 9 p.m. You reminded me I have a right to rest. Each message was a quiet echo of a shared burden, a thread that connected strangers across cities, across countries, across languages. All of us, in different homes, at different tables, had been taught the same lie, that love is proven through endless sacrifice. Some stories broke my heart. One woman had been sending half her paycheck to her older brother for years, only to find out he used it to gamble. Another man had been caring for his sister's children while she traveled for work, unpaid and unthanked, because she claimed, "You're their uncle, you owe them." There were so many versions of my story that I began to realize just how common it was, and that realization brought a strange kind of grief, not just for myself, but for everyone who had spent years being used, mislabeled, and guilt-tripped into silence. But there was also something else: strength. These messages weren't just filled with sorrow, they were filled with awakening. People were beginning to draw boundaries, to say no, to step back, and most of them had done so after reading something I had written from a tiny courtyard in Santa Fe. It was humbling. It was surreal. A week later, I received an email that brought tears to my eyes. It was from Maya, a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in over 6 years. She had relocated to California after getting married, and we'd lost touch after her move. Her message was titled, "I never knew you were going through this." She wrote, "You were always so calm at work, so pulled together. I thought you had it all figured out. I used to admire how you never seemed fazed, how you never missed a deadline, never asked for help. But now I realize you were carrying so much, and none of us knew." She went on to say that she'd shared my blog with her therapist and that it opened up an entire conversation about how she herself had been performing strength instead of living in it. "Your vulnerability helped me open a door I didn't even know was locked," she ended. I read that message 3 times before closing my laptop. That night, I wrote in my journal, "There's a difference between being quiet and being silenced. I was the second for far too long." The next morning, I was invited to speak on a virtual panel about caregiver burnout, organized by a wellness nonprofit that had come across my blog. I almost said no. I was still learning how to exist in this new version of myself, but then I thought of Lana, of Maya, of the dozens of people who had written to me in the dark hours of the night, just needing someone to say, "You're not wrong for wanting peace." So I said yes. The event was streamed to over 500 people. I wasn't dramatic or emotional, I just told the truth. I spoke about emotional labor, about inherited obligation, about how we confuse endurance with virtue. And when I finished, the chat box filled with applause emojis, clapping hands, and the words, "I needed to hear this." When the screen finally went dark, I sat at my desk and let the silence settle. There was a time I believed walking away meant losing my identity. Now I knew the opposite was true. I hadn't lost myself. I had found her, hidden beneath all the roles I was told I had to play. And what amazed me most was how many others had found themselves too, simply because I had dared to say, "That's enough." Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are not spoken aloud. They're the quiet choices we make when we finally stop shrinking ourselves for others. Elena's story isn't just about stolen money. It's about a lifetime of stolen peace, masked as obligation. It's about a woman who gave everything she had to the people she loved, until she realized love without respect is not love. It's control. By choosing to speak up, to draw a boundary, and to walk away without anger, but with dignity, Elena reclaimed not only her savings, but her identity. She became a mirror for thousands who had been silently suffering under the weight of being the strong one. Her journey reminds us of something essential. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for setting limits. And you are never wrong for choosing yourself when others won't. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the emotional or financial pillar of your family? What did it cost you? And did you ever push back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might just give someone else the courage to change theirs. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful real-life narratives every week. Your voice matters here.